today. Pastor Jack Hibbs, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, California. Jack has spoken at a couple of my conferences and will be with us again this fall, Saturday, September 29th. A lot is going on in the world, and Pastor Jack says everything is counting down, which sounds a bit like my frequent statement, everything is falling into place, nothing is falling apart. He also says God is going to turn things upside down. I hope that's an appropriate tease for you to stick around for the hour. We'll talk about these issues and much, much more. We're going to start with a little bit of a review from last year, and then we're going to look ahead. I'm going to give you contact information as we move along. Pastor Jack, welcome back to Understanding the Times.
Well, Jan, thank you, and it's so great to be with you again and to be part of your voice that you are spreading across the nation. Much needed.
Well, right now it's a frozen voice because you're in lovely California. I'm in bitter cold Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I think the wind chill is about minus 40, but we're inside, not outside. I want to talk a little bit about the new climate, speaking of temperatures, the new climate in the White House. Now, as I do that, Jack, I just want to throw this in so I can get your response, because I think what happened, I'm going back a year now because I'm trying to look back here a little bit before we look forward, that righteous people were worn out from being called bigots, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic. There was no firm voice willing to contend with this narrative. Then the transgender bathrooms came along, and that was the last straw, and many simply turned to a more conservative team in Washington. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong at all, Jan. In fact, the data that is being examined still, post-election data after 1 year by the Family Research Council in Washington, D.C., is now showing that there's a much greater majority of evangelicals that turned out to vote than previously expected, and Americans who were not quite involved in the voting process before. You are correct. There's been a pushback. We are grateful for that. And we're seeing a tremendous, as you said, difference of atmosphere and policy in Washington. And I've had the privilege of speaking with and praying with some of those individuals, Jan. And the news coming out of the Pentagon, out of the CIA, out of the White House itself is extremely encouraging.
It is, and we can reference that in a bit too. But before this topic gets away from me, Jack, is you have been outspoken. Well, you're outspoken in a lot of ways, but you've been vocally upset with a lot of pastors. They don't want to get involved in the voting process, and yet what time in history has it been more important to get involved in the voting process? Just look at 2016.
Jan, you're right. I do feel like I'm banging my head against the wall out here in California, and in some respects across the nation. We are seeing pastors who will not address political issues which shape the very family stability of those who attend their churches. Pastors won't speak to the issues of abortion. They have somehow concluded that it's a political issue, or the issue of gender. They've said now that's a political issue, as though they are to remain neutral or out of it. Yet I understand the Bible to say the exact opposite. The pastor in a local pulpit in a local community should be the clarion voice of righteousness to that area, and we're not seeing it happen. It's your prayer, it's my prayer that revival will come, and if it does come, it's going to first start in America's pulpits.
You're right, and part of the breakdown in America is thanks to America's pulpits, and I've heard you say that, so we're on the same page here with that. Looking at some other issues of the past year, and we're into 2018 now. We're second weekend of 2018, but I don't want to let 2017 quite go yet. We've had some extremely interesting things happen as we speak. There's talk of possibly scrapping the Iranian deal. That was the talk of the month of December. Jack, we've seen almost an end to ISIS. I mean, Mideast Christians can actually have a life now. I think that's one of the most significant stories of all time.
Yeah, it's one of the most significant of all time, and that's no exaggeration, and yet it's one of the least reported, which is sad. Yes, listen, in that part of the world, people are beginning to breathe fresh air again. This is a huge victory. I believe, Jan, it's part of a momentary reprieve, perhaps much like our election, much like this last year of 2017, what's happening with ISIS. There seems to be a little bit of a pause and some good news. You know, Jan, you and I and many others have been praying that God would hear in mercy our prayers, and maybe this is a break, maybe this is a pause. But the Middle East, at this moment, though it's sitting as though we're on a powder keg with Iran and other issues, thank God that ISIS is being severely dealt with.
And we've got Iran, and I'm going to get into some eschatological issues in just a bit, so I don't want to quite go there yet. But as we speak, and I don't think we quite know where this Iranian uprising is going to be headed, because thanks to Barack Obama, the Iranians got billions of dollars from Barack Obama to further the terrorist agenda. And the people in Iran are begging for freedom, are begging to get rid of this malocracy. I don't know if they're going to be successful or not. In the process, so many are being killed or wounded. We need to be praying. And I think another angle, Jack, and I just read it this morning, the untold story of Iran is the number of believers that are coming to faith in Iran. It's astronomical.
I don't know how much our listeners are aware of this, Jan, but it's probably second to China.
Yes.
The amount of converts that are taking place in Iran is literally, you use the word astronomical. It is unbelievable at what's taking place. People are coming to Christ. They can't keep up with it all. They're trying to document it. Islam, Jan, I've said this before to you privately. I'll say it again now publicly. I believe Islam is in its closing chapters. I believe Islam is imploding from within. It has no Bible. It has no promise. It has no God. Islam is nearing its end. And when you've got areas or regimes like Iran imploding from the inside, the amount of people becoming believers, I just believe that is one more profound indicator that the rapture is imminent. When you see that many people in China, in Iran, coming to Christ, something's up. It's going to be big. I don't know exactly what it is. I do hope it's the rapture, but we're going to see something profound in short order.
You're listening to Understanding the Times Radio. I'm Jan Markell. I have on the line from sunny California, Pastor Jack Hibbs, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, California. You can learn a lot more at reallifewithjackhibbs.org, reallifewithjackhibbs.org. I encourage you to go there, check out the audio and the video. Jack also has a radio ministry across the country, but you can learn all of that and more at reallifewithjackhibbs.org. Let me just cite a few more things that I think are prominent. Well, in the past, because we're into the new year now. Jack, Nikki Haley is an absolute breath of fresh air. Did we ever think it could be that fantastic at the United Nations? With her position, the rest of the UN is still totally bankrupt, but not Nikki Haley.
Well, it's amazing, too. Not only Nikki Haley, who loves the Lord, Nikki Haley, who is fearless. I've nicknamed Nikki Haley our modern-day Deborah.
Yes,
she
you
is
have.
A warrior princess of an ambassador. But listen, the inspiration that she brings to the world, the inspiration that she's bringing to democracy, to women, is incredibly refreshing. And truth. She's not afraid to speak the truth. She does it kindly and gently, but people know at the UN and around the world that what she says she means. Nikki Haley is one of those remarkable appointments that Trump has put in place. And I tell you what, she continuing to do a great job. And one of the things that you and I share, Jan, is the fact that she loves Israel.
Yes.
And Israel loves Nikki Haley.
Let me just give a short illustration here. It's a minute and a half of Nikki Haley telling off the UN as only she can do.
The United States is by far the single largest contributor to the United Nations and its agencies. We do this in part in order to advance our values and our interests. When that happens, our participation in the UN produces great good for the world. Together we feed, clothe, and educate desperate people. We nurture and sustain fragile peace in conflict areas throughout the world. And we hold outlaw regimes accountable. We do this because it represents who we are. It is our American way. But we'll be honest with you. When we make generous contributions to the UN, we also have a legitimate expectation that our goodwill is recognized and respected. When a nation is singled out for attack in this organization, that nation is disrespected. What's more, that nation is asked to pay for the privilege of being disrespected. In the case of the United States, we are asked to pay more than anyone else for that dubious privilege. Unlike in some UN member countries, the United States government is answerable to its people. As such, we have an obligation to acknowledge when our political and financial capital is being poorly spent. We have an obligation to demand more for our investment. And if our investment fails, we have an obligation to spend our resources in more productive ways.
Well, telling it as it is, basically saying we got to have more for all the billions we give to you folks. We got to have a better return on our investment. So appreciated her comments there. Again, going back to some things that happened in the previous year that I'm kind of still stunned at. Mainstream media kind of got what it deserved last year. And Jack, I think that some of the scandals that have been going on here in the last year, well, I think they reveal that society has pretty much descended into a Romans 1 mentality, a 2 Timothy 3 culture as well, though that's more applied to the church, but certainly Romans 1 with the depraved mind and the depraved culture.
Well, Jen, can I have this spin to it?
Yeah.
And allow me, if you would, to be intentionally sarcastic just a moment? Yeah, isn't it amazing? The world is calling out the world for their sexual misconduct and their inability to manage money. And yet, isn't it the world that says there is no God, that there are no 10 Commandments? How can we hold, as a culture, these people accountable for their sexual escapades when we teach kids that they're nothing but animals?
That's right.
That they're byproducts of an evolutionary byproduct of chance, and that it's the survival of the fittest. If it feels good, do it. And then we tell people that it's wrong for them to cheat on people or rob people or abuse people. I hope the world is beginning to wake up to the bizarre hypocrisy that they want morality without God. They want standards, but without the standard giver. It is truly, Jan, an insane moment of good, evil, and evil, good, unlike a time I've ever seen in my 60 years.